Welcome back, fellow engineers. Today, I've decided that we should have a look at some useful tips for space platform design. Now, there are a few types of space platforms with overlap on function, and the one that most people will end up building as their first space platform are the stationary space science platforms. Now, these generally have no thrusters, sit over Nalvis, and just plop down white science as they make it. As we can see, this design here is pretty simple, using a nuclear reactor, a sushi belt, some foundries just for increased productivity on the iron plates, but otherwise makes around 1,000 science per minute at full production. This is the most basic type of space platform and requires no defenses. The next type of space platform is going to be an inner planet hauler. Now, the inner planets are Vulcanus, Gleba, Fulgora, and Navis. These planets only spawn medium asteroids. Medium asteroids, if not stopped, will destroy a space platform. They have 400 health, are 100% resistant to electric and fire, 90% to laser, but have very minimal physical protection. Meaning that if you have enough laser turrets with laser turret damage or gun turrets, you'll be able to take care of these asteroids very easily. Medium asteroids spawn around the inner planets except for Nalvis. Nalvis is the only safe zone where you do not need turrets to stay in orbit. However, this ship around Fulgora is experiencing medium asteroid spawning, hence why the laser turrets are still active. Generally, inner planet haulers do not require much power or production, so in the late stages of the game, a simple one foundry setup will work. Minding you, this is all legendary. And an example of that very simple foundry setup to make yellow ammo is as follows. We will have a crusher to make iron ore. We'll have advanced oxide processing to make calcite, so that we can then put that into a foundry and take advantage of the productivity bonus. In this case, with 4 legendary productivity 3 modules, we receive 150% productivity. Compounding on that next step is the fact that we then have to cast it out, which gives us another 150% productivity, which we can then put into our ammunition. So this simple process is enough to create yellow ammunition at a decently fast rate, especially with beacons allowing us to create this even faster. So using just yellow ammunition alone, we can conquer all of the inner planets. But something happens when we try and get to Aquilo. We experience big asteroid chunks. Now, big asteroid chunks have an extreme amount of physical damage resistance, but are very weak to explosion damage, which means to get to Aquilo, we're going to need to make rocket turrets, which you probably already knew. But that then brings us on how do we make rockets? Rockets are going to take iron plates and explosives. We can siphon some of the iron plates off from our original recipe, but now we need to be able to make explosives, which take coal, sulfur, and water. Water comes from ice, which is very simple. But where do we get sulfur and coal from? On Nalvis, sulfur comes from water and petroleum, but in space, sulfur comes from advanced carbonic asteroid crushing, which gives us 2 sulfur and 5 carbon. Now this is where the magic happens. This is a beautiful ratio. Thank you, Woob, for doing this. We have 2 sulfur and 5 carbon. Carbon isn't coal, but carbon can be made into coal with a recipe called coal synthesis, which takes 1 sulfur and 5 carbon. So we net 1 sulfur from our advanced crushing, which we can then use in the recipe for our explosives. And that 1 coal that we're going to get from our sulfur, that means from 1 crusher here, we can make carbon and sulfur, which will be used to make coal, and then make explosives. And now this is where the trick is going to come into play. We need to make sure that these stack inserters do not input more than 1 into each of these buildings. Because if more than 1 is inserted, the whole ratio breaks and will eventually back up on carbon. So we need to make sure we override the stack size to 1 and set filters for sulfur. Carbon can be automatically inputted. And using this simple setup, we do have one limitation. And that is we can't use productivity modules on the explosive recipe or the coal synthesis recipe, because if we do, it'll muck up the ratio and we will then run out of ingredients somewhere along the chain. So let's turn this on and see if we can make ourselves some carbon and coal. And the proof is in the pudding. This system has been running for around 5 minutes now and has not backed up. While the numbers do fluctuate a little bit, the system is fairly auto-balancing. But if you're kind of anxious about everything like I am, let's see how we can put a safety method on this. Now, the safety method is going to be pretty simple. What we're going to do here is we're going to read contents, and we can include the crafting. It doesn't particularly matter. And we want to enable this inserter into the explosives if sulfur is less than 4, for instance. And we can enable the same condition on the explosives. And because there is 7 sulfur in the coal synthesis plant, only sulfur will be inserted into our cryogenic plant to start with until the recipes are balanced out, which will be when we get more carbonic chunks. So that's how you'd implement a safety mechanism. Pretty simple, and you can do this for any recipe that requires a balance like this. But what if we wanted to go further? What if we wanted to go to the solar system edge and win the game, and beyond to the shattered planet? Well, in my very humble opinion, because asteroids at that point become so abundant and so ludicrously cheap and infinite, we might want to upgrade our ammo production. For instance, my Prometheum ship uses explosive rocketry and piercing ammunition, as well as the required railguns. So first, let's cover how we make red ammunition. So piercing ammunition requires copper plates, steel plates, and iron plates in the form of firearm magazines, or yellow ammo. We've already covered how to make iron ore, but now we need to think about copper. Now, copper comes from advanced metallic asteroid crushing, which also produces iron, which means we need to consume that iron or trash it to make sure that there is a constant flow of copper. We also have the problem that if iron backs up onto the belt, we will have no way of producing copper and we will stall on our ammo production. And the best way to deal with that is very simple circuit logic. In this case, we have our copper producer, which will continuously produce copper with no trashing. So if copper backs up, that's fine. Iron will be constantly produced here as well to ensure that copper is the priority. However, if we run out of iron with leftover copper, or the copper is full and there's no iron, we need another way of producing iron. And that comes from regular iron asteroid crushing, which will produce us iron ore when there is less than 1 item on the belt, on this little belt here. We're also going to need to make sure that we can then throw out the iron if we get a backup and no copper is being produced. And we can do this in 2 ways. The first one is that we can say when iron ore on this belt is greater than 10, we'll throw it out. We could also say if there is no copper on, throw out the iron. And then as usual, we have our calcite production going into foundries and using that sweet productivity bonus to get as much out of here as possible. So let's turn it on and see if it works. And there we go. We are now producing a constant stream of red ammo. And we are also always making sure that we have copper. Right now, it's just a casting speed issue as to why we are slowly draining on copper. But that's how we make piercing ammunition. Now, the final piece of ammunition that we need to make is railgun ammo, which is 5 steel, 2 explosives, and 10 copper cables. Now, even though I have mentioned that in space the asteroids are free and will come at you so fast that you'll actually have no idea what to do with them, how can we make copper cable the best to make it as efficient as possible so that we don't overstress our systems? Well, in space, there are 2 ways that you can make copper cable. You can cast it directly from the foundry, or you can also make it in the electromagnetic plant. And I'm going to show you exactly how much 50 copper ore gets you in both of these processes. And now it may seem kind of simple to some, but I think it's always useful to point out that the more steps that you can make in terms of a machine's productivity, the more output you are likely to get. In this case, the direct foundry recipe has netted us 1,000 copper cable out of 50 copper ore. Fantastic. But with just a little bit more power and a bit more infrastructure, we've actually managed to get 1,300 copper cable out of the electromagnetic plant. Is it exactly worth it to have this on your ship? Well, it's up to you. If you want to go via the scarcity mindset, certainly have this. But if you, like me, have the infinity mindset, where the amount of asteroids coming in is so great that you'll always have a surplus of materials, then just go for the direct foundry recipe. It's much simpler. And here are just some very simple designs for actual ammo creation. Explosive rockets just take more explosives and some regular rockets, which are just explosives and iron. So very simple build there. Railgun shells are a little bit more complicated because they take 3 ingredients, but it's just explosive steel and copper cables, so pretty simple there. And red ammunition, again, is just as simple as some firearm magazines, copper plates, and steel plates. So, all in all, pretty simple, but very effective. Now, I hope these tips and tricks are useful to you, and you can apply them into your game as you play. Hopefully now you've got a bit more of an understanding of the concepts around our space platforms, how to make the ammunition, and just some easy relationships so that you don't have to get stuck in the headache of managing resource production. With that all being said, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.